$3.7 billion. This is the amount of money the SEC assessed in 2017 in penalties and disgorgements. This is according to their own annual enforcement report. How does an RIA insure itself against running afoul of regulators and paying such exorbitant penalties and taking direct hits to your own hard-earned profitability? This is the first in a series of videos I'll be putting together that focuses on helping RIAs implement sound financial practices in their firms, and therefore help prevent them from running afoul of regulatory bodies. I'm Steve Fisher, and I spent almost 20 years as the CFO and FinOp of a national brokerage firm. I have had Series 27 licensing, 7 licensing, 63 licensing. I've spent hours talking to regulators over the years. I've been through dozens of regulatory audits, financial audits, and there's a tremendous amount of information I'd like to share with you. Something that came across my desk recently was the Securities and Exchange Commission's request for comment, file number S70918. It deals with several items in the RIA universe, but the one I want to focus on is the last one mentioned, which is their financial responsibility section. And they talk quite a bit about capital requirements on RIAs, fidelity bonds, annual audits. And what I'm seeing is they're asking the basic question is, should we model the financial responsibility in the RIA world on the broker-dealer world? Those of you who may not know, broker-dealers have significantly higher capital requirements than an RIA. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, potentially millions of dollars of capital requirements depending upon the size of the broker-dealer. And what the SEC clearly says in here is that in reviewing the RIA world, they feel there's a deficiency, that in many instances there's not enough money in an RIA for them to be able to pay penalties and disgorgements that they may be mandated to. And so they feel that's a large problem because they're not able to get those fines. They can't draw blood from a stone. So they're looking for a way to fix that problem as they see it. When you read this, they're coming down on basically three ways to attack this. They're either saying A, we propose raising the capital requirements of an RIA significantly higher than where they may be now, depending on which type of RIA you fall in. The other way is significantly raising fidelity bond requirements, so that way you have a third-party insurer effectively guaranteeing your capital to be able to pay fines and penalties. And then finally, there's a question of whether or not they should implement additional annual audits if necessary of RIAs, and then therefore additional filing and reporting and that whole world that I came out of in the broker-dealer world. I would advise you to pick up a copy of this if you haven't already seen it. Review it again and comment. Comments are due August 7th. That's next week at the time of this video. So I would advise you to get out there and review it. But in any event, this at least should get you thinking. Additional capital requirements or audits or fidelity bonds, that's coming. It's just a question of when. Regulators don't usually shrink in size. They're always looking for additional funds, and they're looking at you, the RIA world, as a potential source of those additional funds. They're claiming there's been a problem in collecting money, so they're going to ensure that you have the money to be able to pay them. So, with that in mind, what do you do? Well, if it was me, the first thing I would do is look at my own financial records, my own financial statements. How good are they? I need to know very clearly where I am right now as far as my capital and net worth. And my net worth, subject to, we call it net capital in the broker-dealer world. The net worth is defined in the RIA world, is similar in the sense that it basically take your net worth and you subtract out of it any non-liquid assets to come up with a adjusted net worth, and that's the figure that they want to use. So things like prepaid assets that you might have on your books, or goodwill or anything like that, that would be a non-allowable asset, so you can't count that because you can't convert that to cash readily. So the first thing I would do is take a look at my books and ask that question, have they ever been audited by an independent auditor? And if they haven't, what do I need to do to get them audited? And I would caution you here. There's great CPAs out there. There's great auditors out there that can look at your books. But my advice is find an auditor or find somebody to look at your books who knows specifically about the financial services world and those things that need to be excluded from net worth, as opposed to those CPAs who work under the normal generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP, because there are significant differences between what we call GAAP financials and regulated financials. They start with GAAP financials and they convert them over to regulated financials. So you need to talk to somebody who knows the difference, who preferably has held a Series 27 or been the FinOp or been the CFO of a financial services firm. So once you know where you are, your next step is, okay, now what should my capital targets be? Well, they haven't. You can look and see where you are if you're a $35,000 required RIA or whatever your level is currently, and say, look, I need to have that number higher, but I don't want it so high that I am too tempting a target. There's a fine line there. You want to have enough capital that you satisfy any regulatory requirements. You have your operating capital so you can continue doing your business, but you don't want to be a big target out there. So you want to be able to withdraw capital down to a level that you can continue to operate comfortably, but not make yourself a target. So once you do that and you determine what your capital target is, you then have to figure, okay, now how am I going to get there? Because it's going to be significantly higher than where you are now, most likely. Well, first is you got to look at your overall business model and the profitability in your business lines and all the standard business analysis that any good CFO can do for you, or if you in product line and revenue recognition and all those, we'll call them accounting buzzwords, but it's all basically CFO level financial planning and business analysis. And there's folks out there like myself who can do that and help steer your ship and let you make the decision of what you want to do going forward. The other thing you have to do is, before you get to the point where you have increased your profitability so you can build your capital and you hit those targets, and again, you want to do this, start working on this now, well ahead of when a regulatory body comes in and says, okay, next year you need to be at X, and you're sitting there fumbling around because you have no idea how you're going to get there. So you also want to look at sources of capital. You need to be able to tap sources for a quick capital infusion. Doesn't mean you need it today. It's kind of like you need to open, I don't want to call it a credit line because it's not a loan necessarily, but it's either either you have taken money out of the business and it's you have it in your own personal account away from the business. Is it ready to be injected back in the business? Should you have a capital need, a fine or a penalty? Do you have a relative? Do you have a business associate? Not a client. Typically stay away from that, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. You don't want to get into commingling of customer funds. But do you have ready access to capital should you need it? That's the next step for you to work on. I've spent a few times looking at NASA, the North American Securities Administration Association. I was looking at their deficiency report, their 2017 deficiencies report, and this was very educational for me. And let me just share some of the things I see on it. about half of all deficiencies noted, probably over half, were dealt with financial matters, not necessarily the compliance, customer suitability matters. Well, those were big. About half of them dealt with financial matters, and we're talking about some pretty low-hanging fruit that you can take care of immediately. I was shocked when I saw that a huge deficiency was found in a lack of trial balances and financial statements for RIAs. This is a function of a couple of things. One is you don't have a system in place to quickly generate those reports. They're very basic reports. Two is they're not being updated quickly, promptly. So the information is either forgotten or not input correctly, or not there by the time a regulator looks at it. But a lot of that stems from the fact that you've got either lower level bookkeeping people maintaining your books, and they're never being looked at until a regulator looks at it or an auditor looks at it. Or it's not something you as the RIA owner pays that much attention to the details of. I mean, you want to know the big picture. Where am I profitable? What's my number? But you're out there talking to your clients and helping your clients and customers. Your strength is not necessarily being tied down in the weeds of the accounting. So you need to work with somebody who can at least come in and review it, who's on your side, to show you where you might be running afoul. But as I mentioned, things like the trial balance financial statements, these are all very low-hanging fruit that any good RIA consultant who's got a financial background can come in and quickly identify. If you don't have them now, that's okay. We can get that fixed if you address it now. Checkbooks, bank statements, just we're talking about paperwork just being gathered here. Another interesting part is that of the financial deficiencies found, about 1 in 5 about half of the financial deficiencies found, which is almost 1 in 5 of all 1 in 5 deficiencies found in all audits, dealt with the fact that there wasn't enough capital in the RIA for whatever level it required. This goes back to what we talked about before. You're working in a world where you're undercapitalized. Regulators have not been really focused on you yet, but as I can tell, as I've noted from this initial SEC request for comment, they're beginning to look your way if you are in that boat and you're undercapitalized. So this is a wake-up call to you. So these are things where you can get somebody in who knows what they're looking at in a financial services firm, can work with you and point out where you are really right now, not glossing over anything. Somebody who's on your side, who can find these things, and so you can put a corrective measure in place before a regulator comes in and you no longer have that option. The other thing we want to talk about is once you establish where you are now, where you'd like to be, now we move into that leads us into the world of budgeting and forecasting and modeling. Do you do any of that? Do you really, you want, people talk about, hey, I want to be here somewhere in 5 years, and they have some nebulous idea of where they want that company in 5 years. How are you going to get there? If you know where you want to be in 5 years, you better know where you're going to be next year. And then how'd you get that? Was there a real logical way you're going to get to where you're supposed to be next year? Have you really thought about the details of that? Have you thought about the granularity in your financial statements? What that's going to look like? Because if you don't think about that now and you don't have a good budget and forecast in place, when you get to next year and you look at that financial statement, how do you know if you succeeded? Or if you didn't hit your bottom line, how do you know where you fell short? You don't have the roadmap. You need somebody experienced in budgeting and forecasting to take a peek at that. The other thing you want to talk about is modeling. As new product lines come on board, you want to see how that impacts your business. This is something we did at the broker-dealer level quite a bit. As we brought on new product lines, we always asked ourselves the question is, what do we project this will be the impact of this on our bottom line? And we thought about that, and sometimes we were right, most of the time we were right, and sometimes we weren't right. And then we could go back and say, well, where did we miss it? What was the assumption we made that wasn't accurate? And we took that lesson and applied it towards the next opportunity. I think in talking with many RA owners, smaller ones to mid-sized ones, they focus so much on wanting to do a good job for their customers, which is where their focus should be, that they open themselves wide open to financial regulatory nightmares, not through any dishonesty or anything like that necessarily. It's really through just a lack of understanding about what's involved. How do I keep the books of my company? So, with that said, the other thing I would recommend strongly is you contact somebody like our team here at myralawyer.com and go through a mock audit with a financial reporting addendum onto it. So you're getting all your compliance and all your legal work and regulatory work, and you're getting somebody to take a look at your finances to give you a roadmap of where you are now, where problems that exist right now that you may not be aware of, where do you want to be, and how you're going to get there. So that's all I've got for today's conversation. It's a little general and a little kind of an overview, but I really wanted to get across to you is that you need to take a hard look at your books, your financial books right now. Things are changing. The environment you work in, you've worked in for a long time, is changing. It's going to get tighter. You can succeed, and you will succeed, only if you address and identify your shortcomings now and address them now. Stay tuned and stay tuned, and we will let you know when the next video I put out is and what we'll be covering the next time. I've got a few ideas, and if you have any good ideas, I'd welcome a comment or two. Would be great. You can reach me at myralawyer.com, and you'll see me out there, and I'll be happy to speak to any of you should you have any questions. Thank you, and good luck in your business.